This is the 2020 Kia Soul, and it is one of my favorite compact cars on the market, maybe my very favorite. The compact car market mainly consists of boring old regular sedans. You have this and this and this and this, and you can barely even tell them apart. You can easily tell apart the Kia Soul, which is all new, fully redesigned for the 2020 model year. Today, I'm going to review it. First, a brief overview. Now, the Kia Soul first came out for the 2010 model year, which is the very same year that Kia launched the Forte compact sedan. And the thinking at the time was the Forte would be the popular small Kia to take on all the other popular compact sedans, and the Soul would be the funky, weird one, and it would rival cars like the Nissan Cube and the Scion XB and the Honda Element. But that's not quite what happened. Instead, the Soul took off in popularity, vastly outselling the Forte like 3-1, and the Honda Element, the Nissan Cube, and the Scion XB have all been canceled. But the Soul shows no signs of slowing down. The Soul is all new and totally redesigned for the 2020 model year, and this is the third generation of the Soul, although it keeps the same charm and the same basic shape as the original. Now, two engines are offered. The base engine has 147 horsepower, or you can upgrade to a more powerful engine with 201 horsepower, like this Soul has. Kia says an electric version is on the way. As for base pricing, it's around $1,000 more expensive to start than the outgoing Soul, meaning the base price is around $18,500 with shipping. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the Soul, and I'm going to show you all of the quirks and features of the quirky new Kia Soul. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a DougScore. And for more of my thoughts on the Soul, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the coolest old hatchbacks currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now, I'm going to start the quirks and features on the inside of this Soul, and I'm going to start with the heads-up display, which is kind of unusual. Now, a lot of cars have heads-up displays. They project certain vital information onto the windshield while you're driving, so you see it in front of you. The Soul does it a little differently. It doesn't have a heads-up display until you press this little button to the left of the steering wheel, and then one automatically whirs itself up behind the gauge cluster. You can hear it going, and then it is a heads-up display. It's not projected onto the windshield. Instead, it's projected onto this little clear piece that has come up behind the gauge cluster, but it works relatively the same. It's sort of a budget heads-up display. Next up, by far the best quirk of the new Soul is the sound mood lamp. All right, you can access this by going into the infotainment system. You can turn on the sound mood lamp, and then you can configure this unusual trim on the door panel to light up to the beat of your music, and it will play along with the music in 6 separate categories. You have Hey Yo, Party Time, Traveling, Romance, Midnight City, and Cafe. And I absolutely love how they're displayed in the infotainment system. They're all just side profiles of the Kia Soul, all containing images of what they're named for. So anyway, you pick whichever mood you want, and then the lights in the door panel will light up to the beat of your music, depending on which mood you've selected. So maybe Party Time is a little crazier, and Romance is a little bit more calm and romantic. Now, personally, I can't seem to get this to work, at least during the daytime. I cut my hands over it to try to make it dark, and I just can't seem to get these mood lights to actually turn on and bounce to my music. But I'm gonna try it at night, and we'll see if that works. And yes, it does work. Check this out. As the music plays, the mood lighting brightens and dims based on the beat of the music, which is just wonderfully quirky and weird. As it turns out, it doesn't matter which mood setting you choose, the mood lighting always brightens and dims with the music the same amount, so the mood setting only really configures the color of the lighting. One other interesting item, the mood lighting in the top half of the door panels turns off when you're actually in motion so it doesn't distract you while you're driving. It turns back on when you come to a stop, even if you're just sitting at a traffic light. One other thing, you don't have to choose a mood, you can also choose a solid color that will pulse with the beat of the music. Naturally, all of these colors have unusual and weird names. My personal favorites are Violet Cloud and Peaceful Forest, which I assume are just purple and green. Next up, speaking of the sound system, another funky item in this car, you have speakers in all the usual places like the door panels as you saw, but this car also has speakers next to the climate control vents on either side of the dashboard. There's one to the left of the steering wheel and there's one all the way over on the passenger side, just a little extra speaker location for more funkiness in the sole. Another weird item in the sole, this time in the center console next to the gear lever, you have the heated seat buttons, and they are absolutely massive. These are the largest heated seat buttons I've ever seen. In fact, the heated seat button is larger than the engine start-stop button. It actually turns the vehicle on or off. I guess they wanted heated seats to be a really important and easily pressable feature in this car. Now, with that said, aside from those things I just mentioned, this interior isn't really all that quirky, which is kind of disappointing to me. This is a quirky car with a quirky look, and there's always been a quirky marketing campaign around it, and I like the sound mood lamp, but otherwise, things in here are fairly typical of a compact car. I was kind of hoping the Kia Soul would have more funky, weird quirks and features. In fact, Kia has even gotten rid of one of my favorite things in the Soul, which was its trim level names. It wasn't just LX and EX and boring stuff. Instead, the Soul trims were like exclamation point and plus sign, and of course, this drove the car journalists crazy. Like, how do we call it the Soul exclamation point? And then it screws up the syntax of the sentence and maybe that's why they changed it. But now it has boring traditional trim levels like LX and EX and GS and GT, and none of that stuff is quite as unusual. I want a quirky car, and this doesn't go quite quirky enough for me. Or at least that's true for the interior, but it isn't quite true for the exterior, because on the outside, the Soul is just as funky and weird as it's always been, maybe even weirder, and there's no better example of that than back here. Now, you've heard of light bars that go across the back of the car. They've become a popular industry trend. Well, the Soul has a light circle that basically starts here and goes all the way around the entire tailgate. Now, unfortunately, not all of that lights up. Only the sides do, and obviously the third brake light in the middle. This part doesn't, and the whole circle around doesn't. But nonetheless, even when just the tail lights are on, this car has a very distinctive rear brake light pattern back here that makes it look more funky and weird and special than your typical boring compact car. I also love this piece here, this like floating body panel on the tailgate. It's almost like, how did this get here and why is it here? And it contributes to the Soul's funky, weird look. Now, I've already heard some complaints about the Soul's rear end design from supposed car enthusiasts who don't like the tail light circle or this floating body colored piece. Of course, these are the same people who complain cars today are too boring, and then someone does something like this and it's cars today are too ugly. And there's just no way to please these idiots. But if you go in with an open mind and you expect kind of a funky, quirky thing from the Soul, that's what you get back here. And another interesting piece of design on the Soul is that the Soul has adopted the floating roof trend that is now very popular in the car industry, basically extending the window line all the way to the rear end of the tailgate and making it look like the roof is floating above everything. You can see Kia did it by putting this panel here that says Soul, and that separates visually the bottom half of the car from the roof, and it gives it sort of that floating roof look. Now, as I look at this and I see this car's name printed here, Soul, I'm reminded of something interesting I've considered about this car. You know, Kia is a South Korean car company, and South Korea's capital and largest city is Seoul, spelled S-E-O-U-L. The car is Seoul, spelled like Seoul, S-O-U-L. Is that a coincidence? Or did they name the car after the city and they wanted it to be sort of an interesting play on words? The Soul from Seoul. I'm not really sure, but I've always wondered about that. And next up, we move on to the front of the new Soul for more funkiness, and specifically the fact that in between the headlights in most cars, you have a grille. In between the headlights in this car, you have a light bar. This car doesn't just have a light bar in back, it has a light bar across the front. Very disappointingly, it doesn't light up. Only the sides, the actual headlight clusters, light up when you turn on the running lights or the headlights. I really wish this whole front light bar lit up, but it still has a cool and funky look to it that you expect from the Kia Soul. Now, the grille, as a result of not being here, has been pushed down here, and so now it's basically in the bumper, and the grille of this car is obviously rather weird. It's large, it looks like a pouty lower lip coming off the front of this car, and it's filled with all these Ys. You can see this little Y pattern throughout the grille. Y. Basically everywhere you look in front. It is an odd front end design for an odd and vehicle. And next up, moving back to the inside of the sole, I want to move on to the back seats, which are shockingly roomy for a compact car. I have the driver's seat positioned where I would sit, and I'm 6'4", and you can see I actually fit back here as a backseat passenger. My knees are right up against the seat, but nonetheless, I'm back here, and I have at least 3 or 4 inches of headroom, which is way more than I can say in virtually any other compact car. It is a surprisingly roomy interior back here. And the back seat of this car also has the same quirky door panel trim for the sound mood lamp, implying that if I could get it dark enough to actually see the sound mood lamp, you would see it bouncing along to the beat of the music just like it does in front. One thing the rear of this car does not have is a little storage pocket on the back of the driver's seat. You have one on the back of the passenger seat, but they decided to cheap out and not put one on the back of the driver's seat, which is an interesting cost-cutting move in a vehicle where the interior lights bounce along to the music with 6 different mood options. Yeah, we're gonna give them the Midnight City mood, but we're not gonna give them a storage pocket in the back. And next we move on to the cargo area of the sole, which frankly is one of my very favorite things about it, mostly because this is the main thing that separates this car from something like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla. Yeah, you can get one of those and they're great cars and they'll be fine, but if you get one of these, not only do you have a car that's more distinctive and more funky, but it's also more practical, so it's beneficial in a bunch of ways. I mean, if you put down the seats, this cargo area is massive, and because of this car's sort of boxy design in back, you can fill up the cargo area with TVs and tables, and you could probably move your whole apartment in one of these, which is a lot more than you can say for the typical, traditional, old-fashioned compact sedans. Not only are they not as distinctive, they're not as practical. And next I'm moving back to the front seat of the sole because I want to talk technology. And first, I want to say just a general word about this car's technology. It's really impressive. In the middle, you have a giant and very responsive center touchscreen that has a zillion different functions, including navigation, satellite radio, basically everything you could ask for. And then there's the long list of safety technology. I already showed you the heads-up display, but you also get blind spot monitoring, forward collision, automatic braking. This car even has radar cruise control, so it'll slow down and speed up based on the speed of traffic ahead of you. This thing is loaded up with all of the gadgets and features that sometimes you don't even get in luxury cars. The result of that is that pricing for this version is well above the $18,500 base price. Figure $22,000 to $24,000 if you want all this tech, and about $28,000 if you want all this tech and the powerful 201 horsepower turbo 4-cylinder like this Soul has. Now, some of these technology features are a little weird and quirky, and so I'm going to show them to you. And I'm going to start in the gauge cluster with what happens when you turn on the car. It goes through a system check, and it shows that by showing the car drive through like this invisible force field that I guess is checking out all the systems. I also have to admit that I think it's kind of charming what happens when you turn off the Soul. Namely, it plays a little goodbye song. Take a listen. Now, I've made fun of other Hyundai and Kia models for this ridiculous sound before, and you can turn it off. You can go into the gauge cluster screen and actually turn off the sound if you want to, but I must admit that I kind of like it. I find it to be a little charming. You turn off the car and it plays like a little goodbye tone, like your own personal soundtrack as you're leaving your Soul. Now, next up into the infotainment system, and I've covered this infotainment system in reviews of the Kia Stinger and the Kia K900, which I will link in the description below, but I still found a couple of interesting quirks in here, starting with the fact that you can check the Doppler radar map in this infotainment system. You click on it, you can see where there are rain clouds and snow clouds, although if you do that, you'll notice the map they give you, you can only scroll up and down like it's a website. You can't actually go side to side. What if I want to know what the weather looks like over there? Well, too bad. You can't do that. You don't have that option. Now, with that said, you can look at different weather for different cities. If you go into weather, it will show the city where you're currently in, but you can change the city. And the first option is it gives you a list of different cities within your state, but then you can click on change state and you can see a list of all the different states you can change to. For example, the state of Alberta, one of my favorite states, or the state of the District of Columbia. Or if you keep scrolling, they have the state of Manitoba. So Kia has done a really comprehensive job of getting all of the United States of America. All 65, 67 US states are represented in here. Excellent, fantastic infotainment. Next up, here's a piece of minutia that I found interesting in the infotainment system. If you go into advanced settings, this infotainment system lets you configure what happens to the tuner knob when you have the navigation map showing. So you can choose whether you want it to still be a tuner knob or whether you want it to turn into a zoom function for the navigation map. It's incredible that that's configurable, that they even thought of that. Most automakers would just choose one of those things and give it to you that way, or not even consider that they should change the function of the tuner knob. In this car, you can choose what that tuner knob does. Finally, the other interesting thing I want to discuss in here is the owner's manual. You pull the owner's manual out, and the first thing you will notice is there's this little warning that comes with all Kia Souls equipped with a dual clutch transmission, as this car has, explaining how a dual clutch works and how it's a little different from a standard automatic. Now, my personal favorite thing on here is there's an explanation of all the transmission warning lights. For example, transmission temperature is high, stop the car. Transmission is hot, park the car. And then there's another one, transmission is cooling, remain parked for 0 minutes. In order to cool down the transmission, Kia tells you right here, you have to park the car for 0 minutes, or else it simply will not cool down. Okay. Now, next we move on to the owner's manual, which is unusually thick and long. And as I was looking through here, I started to figure out why, because Kia really wants to protect themselves. For example, on page 4, incredibly long dash 138, it says electric shock. Do not put a finger or a foreign object into a power outlet or touch with a wet hand. You may get an electric shock. Thank you, Kia. That's something I learned when I was 6. They felt it was necessary to include in the owner's manual for a vehicle. Can you imagine the kind of idiots who buy cars that they have to put these kind of warnings in the owner's manual just to prevent these people from suing them later? Oh, you didn't tell me I can't stick a pen into an electrical outlet. I'm suing. I guess Kia is really worried about the American market and all of its lawsuits. And so that's a tour of the 2020 Kia Soul. And now it's time to get it out on the road and drive it. All right, driving the Kia Soul. I gotta tell you, I really love this car. And I have ever since it came out. And I mostly love it. It's a good car, and I've explained part of why, and I'll explain more on this drive, but most of the reason I love it is it's just proof that you don't have to do the same boring thing that every other car company does. You can think outside the box and come up with something a little weird, and sometimes it's a huge success. So what do I think about the driving experience of this car? Well, one thing, I don't agree with the fact that Kia classifies this vehicle as a crossover. It is tall, taller than some true crossovers, but it doesn't have all-wheel drive, and it doesn't have much ground clearance, and you don't really sit up all that high. It feels to me more like sort of a compact car and a hatchback, but obviously crossovers are kind of what sells these days. And so that's why Kia calls it that. One thing I am impressed with in this car is the powertrain. Most economy cars, compact cars, are sluggish. And I suspect that the base engine in this car with only 147 horsepower probably does feel pretty lethargic a lot of the time. But this engine with 201 horsepower, this thing moves. Now, it takes a while for the transmission to gear down, but it actually goes really kind of quick, surprisingly so, and then the shifts are pretty smooth because it's a dual clutch. It's actually an impressively quick vehicle. Now, one thing I do want to mention in this car is interior noise. There's actually not all that much interior noise, generally speaking. On the highway here, you hear some wind rush, I think more than I'm accustomed to, even in other compact cars. You don't hear a lot of tire noise. Where you do hear noise, though, is under hard acceleration. You really push it, and you can really kind of hear the engine whine as it gears down and goes and accelerates. The radar cruise control system in this car is very good. It brings the car all the way to a stop. However, it does not hold it there. So if you're driving in heavy traffic, bumper to bumper, stop traffic, the cruise system will bring it down to 0, but then it turns off and the car starts idling forward like a traditional automatic. So you can't really rely on it to do all of the footwork for you if you're in really heavy traffic. In terms of handling, steering, it feels like a compact car, like a, entry-level small crossover type vehicle. The steering is light and vague, but I mean, that's fine. That's what this vehicle is. And I always get annoyed when car journalists are like, well, I was driving a Prius and the steering is light. Well, that's what Prius owners want. Ultimately, the latest version of the Soul, all it does is modernize as a car that, a lot of people already liked, that I already liked. It makes the styling a little crisper. It provides slightly better technology. And this car is still charming. It's still cool. It's still quirky. I do wish the interior was a little funkier and weirder. But other than that, I just think this is an excellent car. And the Honda Civic is a really, really great small compact car. A great sedan. It's a really good car and probably the gold standard of this segment. But this is more practical, and it's funkier, and it's more distinctive. And I think for people who are just sick of, oh, my friend's got a Civic, my other friend's got a Corolla, my other friend's got an Elantra, they all look the same, they lose in parking lots, well, this is the antidote. This is the compact car that is actually fun and exciting and cool. And so that's the new 2020 Kia Soul, a car that surprised everyone with its popularity. Yes, the Honda Civic is also an excellent compact car if you want the regular stuff, a sedan or maybe a coupe. But if you want something that's a little weirder, a little funkier, and a lot more practical thanks to the huge cargo area, the Soul is your ticket. And now, with the redesign, it's better than ever. And now it's time to give the Soul a DougScore. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Soul is cool and weird and distinctive, but not beautiful. It gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration, somehow it does 0 to 60 in like 6.3 seconds, and it gets a 3 out of 10. This thing is quicker than a Fiesta ST. Handling, though, is only average for the segment, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Fun factor could be higher if Kia took more risks on the inside, but some pulsing interior lights isn't enough to bump it up too much, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and this is cooler than most other stuff in this segment, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 19 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This is well equipped with some cool stuff, but also a bit low on other items. There's no panoramic sunroof, no cooled seats, no top-down camera, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is average for the segment, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is high, the interior is surprisingly nice for this class, but the real benefit is Kia's excellent warranty, and it earns a 7 out of 10. Practicality is excellent given the huge cargo area, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, value, and the one I reviewed with the big engine is just too expensive at more than $28,000. If you want performance, you'll get a Fiesta ST or a Veloster N, both of which are way more engaging than the Soul for similar money. The best buy in the Soul lineup is an EX model in the low to mid $20,000 range, which has all this tech but the smaller engine, which is what most buyers will want anyway. Still, this gets a 7 out of 10, though a mid-level model would gain a point or two. Anyway, add it all up and the DougScore is 52 out of 100. I don't test many small cars like this, but here it is next to some sort of rivals. It perfectly ties the Chevy Bolt, although the Bolt is very different since it's an electric car. But overall, the Soul is great, and I highly recommend the newest version.